Long or short, square or rectangular scarves are fashion statements that are as enjoyable to create as they are to wear. Use lightweight woven or knit fabric, and with a few sewing tips, you'll be creating sensational scarves. Donna Fenske, one of the Sewing with Nancy team designers, is here to share our favorite scarf creations. Donna, we're going to start with a spiral scarf. It can be made in a variety of widths.
Nancy, just using a little sewing savvy, you can transform a rectangle into a drapable bias scarf. We'll give you guidelines and then detail how to fold and sew the fabric to transform a rectangle into a drapable spiral scarf.
Sensational scarves, that's what's coming up next on Sewing with Nancy.
Sewing with Nancy, TV's longest airing sewing and quilting program with Nancy Zieman, is made possible by Baby Lock, a complete line of sewing, quilting, and embroidery machines and sergers. Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. Madeira, specializing in embroidery, quilting, and special effect threads, because creativity is never black and white. Koala Studios, fine sewing furniture custom built in America. Clover, makers of sewing, knitting, quilting, and embroidery products for over 25 years. Experience the Clover difference. Amazing designs and Class A needles.
The spiral scarf is totally on the bias of the fabric, but believe it or not, this fabric was not cut on the bias. Rather, crosswise strips were cut and sewn together, and then a magic of sewing the fabric by special folding and stitching technique created the bias strip. Donna will be showing you that in a few minutes. I would like to go over the widths and the lengths of the scarf pieces. The length of the fabric must be divisible by the width of the scarf. Translating, if I had a 12-inch width of fabric, we'd have to multiply that many times to get the length. This scarf ended up by starting out as 12 inches by 96. Or you may want to start with a smaller width, let's say 4 by 80 or 8 by 88. The choice is yours. Just keep in mind that the width and the length reduce in size after the folding and the stitching, about by a third. So our 12-inch width of fabric went down to approximately 8 inches, 9 inches, and then became totally on the bias. And Donna's going to show you how that bias is stitched and created.
What I'm going to be doing with my small sample here, I have a fairly small scarf that I'm going to demonstrate on. I'm going to fold down the upper left-hand corner to create kind of a diagonal fold here. And I also have a pin about 1/4 inch from this end. I'm simply going to insert it underneath my sewing machine and sew a 1/4 inch seam. And when I get to the pin mark, I'm going to actually stop with the needle down in the fabric. And I'm going to take the pin out, and I'm going to lift my presser foot, and I'm just going to pivot the fabric kind of straight. And again, line up my seam allowances, and I'm having a little difficulty, and just straighten it out, and again start sewing straight. Notice that I will continue to kind of spiral the fabric to meet the raw edges. So instantly I'm creating that bias drape. So you're going to sew a portion of the fabric. You're going to also want to advance and leave an opening so that you can turn the scarf. So I'm going to just raise my needle and advance. So I have an opening for turning. And I'm going to continue sewing straight. And again, the fabric is continually spiraling when I'm sewing. And you will notice too, when I get to the end here, that I have a pin marking my 1/4 inch seam allowance on the lower edge of my scarf. I'm going to again stop with the needle down in the machine at that point. Okay, one more stitch. And then I'm going to lift my presser foot again and straighten out all of my seam allowances and sew the remainder of the tip. Again, this style of stitching has put in that spiral seam on the scarf.
Now, because we had the length divisible by the width, those ends met perfectly. So make sure that you have your math right there. And here's a sample of this, the same fabric that has been stitched. And notice that even though Donna stitched a straight seam, the seam spirals around the edge of the fabric. Now, we have pre-pressed these seams open, and it might be seemingly difficult to get inside the fabric, but what we'd like to use is a wooden dowel. Or if you had a larger scarf, perhaps a sleeve roll. And we just place the dowel inside the scarf and then just press over the dowel. And it works quite well, and you can just keep moving the dowel and the scarf to get all the seams pressed open. And it takes a little time to do this because the seam twists around, but it's well worth the effort. Then after doing all the pressing, you just turn this through the opening so that you have the right side out. I kind of like long scarves, so this is a little bit of a longer piece, but as it comes out, here it's starting to shape, and now I just would turn the other side. Now through this opening, of course, you're going to do some hand sewing when it's complete to close that opening, but within a matter of just a few minutes, I'd say half an hour sewing time and cutting, you would sew that end closed. You would have a scarf that spirals, that's on the bias, and would drape extremely well. But because we have the bias look, you could also make the scarf two-toned. Here's another example of that scarf. You can see that we have used 2 shades of blue, 2 shades of rayon batik, and used the same sewing techniques that Donna demonstrated. We like to have the smaller strip about 1/4 of the size of the total width of the fabric. This fabric now measures 8 inches. We cut this piece 2 1/4 to include a seam allowance, and this piece 6 1/4 to include the seam allowance. Stitch it together, and then the same sewing technique would take place. Fold the right-hand corner in half, creating a 45-degree angle, sewing to the point, and then meeting all edges so that it continues to spiral and twist. The spiral scarf, it's a great technique, and it's certainly sensational. When your scarf is tucked or gathered down the center, there's no need for an elaborate tie. Simply drape the scarf around your neck and it will form cascades of fabric. Silk to challis, the fabric can be light to medium weight with equally dramatic effects. This scarf that we created is of a lightweight drapable, could be a silk or polyester blend fabric. And down the center of the fabric, we've created tucks, sewn in tucks. And we'll show you later another version that is gathered along the edge, but it creates a beautiful ruffle and a cascade. The first technique is to cut the size and then piece together the short ends. The size can vary. The width and length do not have to work in tandem with each other. You can choose the size that you'd like. This happens to be 12 inches. The first rectangle was 12 by 76, and when it's completed, it's almost, I would say, half shorter in length because of the tucks. So you can make your adjustment however you'd like to make your size. But because fabric is not 76 inches wide, you'll have to piece together sections. So we cut 2 lengths that were 12 inches wide, and you can stitch them together with a serge seam, as we have here, lightweight serge seam, or if you would like to make a French seam where you stitch first with fabrics wrong sides together, narrow seam, and then make them right sides together so that you have the enclosed seam, that would work out well, or a flat felled seam. These are 3 options, and we have serged the seam for this particular scarf. Now for this fabric, since it's lightweight and drapable, we've worked with rayon thread in both the lower looper, upper looper, and the right needle. We're going to be using a 3-thread overlock stitch. Now, following your owner's manual, you're going to be serging the edges, but before serging, take a little time to press in the center stitching line. On this particular sample, we've folded the fabric in half, and I have started to press that center, and that's where Donna is going to be stitching along that area. And then after doing the stitching, then you're going to do the stitching. And just stitch along the edge. Do a test first of all before doing the stitching, and stitch all the lengthwise edges and the crosswise edges to have a nice rolled edge. Now you're going to do one more step, and that is when you cross the seams, you're going to have a thread tail. Put a drop of fray check or a seam sealant at this point, let it dry, and then clip off the tail. Now down at the tucking is the beauty part.
Right. And what I've done, you know, with that press mark, it shows a little memory where I can actually straight stitch down. And what I'm going to be doing is taking a few stitches, and I'm going to create a tuck, and I'm simply going to stitch over it, and I'm actually going to let my sewing machine stitch the full length of the foot before I create another tuck. And all I'm doing is creating about a 1/2 inch tuck by the time I've slid it under. And again, I'm letting the foot go the full length before I create another tuck. And what's so wonderful is that this is a really quick scarf to make. Simply, you know, serge a couple lengths of fabric together after they've been seamed and create your tucks, and you have a wonderful gathered look
And you're
without
in charge
a lot
of your
of
own
work.
destiny here by
Right,
just simply
right.
determining the depth of the tuck, the distance between the tucks, and you can easily work through that. As Donna is finishing working with that sample, I'm again just going to show you the cascade scarf and how that stitching evenly goes across the back. And if it was a little uneven, that's not going to matter at all. And then you can wear it over the neckline, and the beauty of it is at the ends drape a beautiful cascade of fabric for another sensational scarf. Change the fabric type, increase the width and length, and we have another variation of the cascading scarf. Because of the width and the length, it can become a wrap. The challis fabric that we use, combined with the elastic technique along the center, makes this another variation of a great style. We have this scarf laid on the table so you can see the various changes. And Donna, we didn't use a 12-inch width.
No, you can use approximately 18 inches, 20, whatever you would like. And basically you're going to do 2 crosswise cuts of the width that you would like. And also you'll need an additional like 2-inch strips, 2 of them for the casing that we're going to create
Sure.
later.
So this fabric was cut 2 strips 18 inches wide, and the fabric was 54 inches in width. So we had over 100 inches after we stitched the 2 together. And then you finish the edges.
You can use a serged edge, or you can also do a double fold. And I have done a double fold on this scarf. And simply fold over once and fold over twice and top stitch, but serging is really quick as well.
Do some pressing, fold over once at a 1/4 of an inch press, and another one, and you'll take a little time, but it's a nice finish.
Right, right. And the beauty of this fabric is that it's nice and reversible.
And extremely drapable. So we have smaller samples to show you the techniques. Now we have high contrast casing fabrics, and you wouldn't need to go into this extreme, but use
Yes,
self
for-
fabric.
Use the self fabric. Also, you could have purchase trim if you'd like.
And this is a purchase bias tape, so you could either consider the purchased, or if you want to make your own bias tape, perhaps consider using a bias tape maker, cutting the strip about 2 inches wide. If I'm going to be working with a 1-inch bias tape, just thread it through the wide end. And I'm sure you've done this before or seen me demonstrate this before, and advance it with the pin. And then as the fabric comes out of the narrow end, just guide the tip of the iron next to the tape maker. And you would be making strips from the self fabric, so it would be made out of the challis fabric.
Right. And the beauty of
Right.
it is that you can make your own trim.
Right, so just crosswise strips.
And then simply we have a press mark down the center of our scarf. Again, that is our placement guide, so that we can position our trim or casing.
And position this, center it over the edge, and then do some top stitching.
In our next sample, we already have the top stitching done, and of course I have high contrast for thread, but the next thing is then to put elastic through our casing, and we're going to just take a couple of minutes and thread it all the way through, realizing that of course on a larger scarf you have quite the length to thread. And when we get to the other side, I'll have Nancy help me kind of even out the gathers. So quickly we'll get it all threaded through.
And really, don't cut the elastic just yet. Don't pre-cut it. Just
Right, because on the original scarf, I basically used half the length of the original scarf. So now we have it pulled through, and if you want to just
Yes.
hold that. And now simply by gathering, we can gather the
tug of war.
elastic evenly, and in a matter of minutes, you have a great gather
Sure.
for the
I'm just going
scarf.
to go like this one more time, and you can see that's the wrong side, but we'll flip it over. You stitch across the ends securely, and this is a mini scarf, but you can see how it cascades, and very easy to make. Knit fabrics are the fabric of choice when creating a continuous loop scarf. Like infinity rings or bracelets, the design cleverly includes one twist to give the scarf great style and shape. Make it two-toned for additional fashion appeal. We can honestly say that you can make this scarf in about 20 minutes.
Oh, I would say it was really fun.
And the knit fabric works so well. We have two fabrics, and each of them have been cut the same size.
Right, and we're just cutting crosswise strips out of our fabric.
They're about 12 inches, so two 12-inch cuts of fabric, and we're going to seam it together into a tube.
And what we have here is we have both strips sewn together with the serger, and what we do on one side is we sew like 6 inches, leave an opening, and continue serging to the end, and the other side is a continuous serge seam.
So we've used a 4-thread overlock stitch.
Correct.
And now we're going to create the twist.
And magic is going to happen here.
Through the opening, pull the fabric right side out, just through the long edge only.
Right, and we're keeping the print on top so that you can see what's going to happen. We have created a little twist here. And now we're going to bring the circle ends together
Through the opening.
through the opening, and we'll let Nancy grab them.
Okay.
It's kind of a team effort here. And we're going to be teaming up again the print with the solid around the circumference of the circle.
So we're going to sew this into, or pin this into a circle, just like this, and we have the print next to the solid, vice versa on the opposite side. And here you can see that I'm just surging it around in that complete circle. After that quick surge, you can turn it right side out.
We have it completely serged, and magically it will turn through that little opening. And again, we'll have to do a little handwork to finish off that opening, but we do have a twist in our scarf.
The two-tone color, I think, is very
Right,
attractive and
right.
a quick gift, a quick accessory to make. But you could also make it in one color and a little shorter. Here's our finished scarf. It's more a cowl length, and you can see that it has that same twist in it. It's drapable. And Donna, you have the sample and the cut size.
It's cut 24 by 30, and we're simply folding it in half. Again, we're serging partway on one side and then leaving an opening and then the remainder.
So you match the 30-inch length.
Right. And what we're doing on the other side is we're making sure that we make a very obvious nip at the fold line
On both ends.
on both ends, because they're going to help us match our piece. So again, we're reaching in to pull the fabric right side out, and then we're going to slip it in, and we're going to match the serge seam with the nip. And I think you can kind of get the idea that we're matching serge seam to the clip to guarantee our twist in the fabric.
So then just serge or stitch around the edge, and when you do the magic of pulling this right side out, here's the cowl size. Again, knit fabrics drape beautifully. It could also be worked with another fabric, a rayon, or whatever, but this knit is a great size, and this is the style I'm wearing. So you can see within a few minutes of time, you can make a great accessory with the infinity scarf. change. It's part of life. As sewers and quilters, our projects progress just as all other aspects of our lives change. For my guest today, her quilting over the past 30 years evolved from traditional patterns to something that's a style of her own. I'd like you to meet Mimi Damrauer. Mimi, you're a textile collage artist, and you didn't start out that way.
That's right, Nancy. I started out as a really traditional quilter. My sister taught me how to quilt. I was always a sewer, so it was fun to look at more art projects rather than clothes. And my first fabrics that I started using were solids because at the time I was really interested in Amish quilting, and I took my direction from those. I loved the solid patterns and how contemporary they still looked. They're very structured patterns though, and I used a lot of templates. And I was really drawn more to the solid fabrics instead of calicos. There weren't a lot of fun prints out at that
30 years
time.
ago, certainly not. And you brought an early piece of yours, art piece, which I think is fun to look at.
Yeah, it's kind of the earlier style. I started painting fabric after I met some other textile surface design artists and took classes from them. And then my prints that I was making, the patterns were really busy, and I was still buying solid fabrics to use with that. So these were some of my earlier pieces. It's a log cabin pattern, you know, which I still make, but have changed that over time as well.
Now, I mentioned change and evolution of how we sew and quilt, and yours has taken quite an interesting change because now this is your full-time job.
It is. It's my full-time job. I've been making what I call them textile collage because I do feel it's different from quilting now. I've been hand painting my own fabric. This has evolved, you know, from the real busy patterns into a more simpler way of doing my fabrics. I paint big pieces of fabric and then I hand cut all of the pieces. So it's more wobbly and kind of improvisational.
And one of the reasons I wanted our viewers to see these pieces is that you mounted them on foam core and then we'll frame them. And what a great way of doing art.
It's a great presentation. I think a lot of people are still not seeing textiles as real art.
Sure.
So when it's in a frame, it looks more important to them.
And this is a fieldstone that you mentioned in inspiration.
Yes, I travel all over the world, and so I'm starting to use my travels as, you know, I find inspiration there. I picked up a stone in Positano, Italy on the beach, and it had these lines in it, and actually the next piece as well is from the other side of the stone. So I'm always, you know, you can find inspiration anywhere and design ideas as well.
So really from a modified log cabin to this contemporary collage, your work has taken a total deviation.
It has, and I think it's mainly using fabrics that I make myself. These are hand-dyed fabrics, so not only do I paint fabric, but hand-dyed fabrics. And here's another piece. These are my drunk circles. These are probably I'm doing circles, lines, and squares are really the series that I'm doing.
So not detailed sewing the seams together, just appliquing one layer on top of the other.
Yes, and I zigzag my backings. Sometimes I'll do a back sheet of one color, and then I applique the squares on first so there's color peeking through.
Certainly.
But then these I also scrunch together and I zigzag them. So
It's always inspiring for me to see how other fiber artists, sewers, quilters interpret their work. And you started out by working with dyeing your own fabric in a really expensive vehicle.
the vessel. People are like, do you do it in big vats? I'm like, plastic bags. What I do is I take a natural cotton muslin. I buy it by the 50-yard bolt, and I will probably dye 300-400 yards of fabric at a time. So I wash the pieces. I do really probably bigger pieces than this, about a yard pieces. I wash it to get the sizing off, and really high-tech, I scrunch it and put it in a plastic baggie. This is how I learned, and then I've kind of modified it a little. I mix my powder dyes. I buy powder dyes mainly in primary colors, some mixed colors, but I mix the colors myself. So my color wheel is my own, and my palette, and then I pour the dye, you know, with water, mix it, and I let them sit in the bag. And because it's scrunched, there's a lot of peaks and valleys.
Yes.
Yeah, and here's, my fabric is so much fun to work with in my studio. I have piles. I mean, when I dye a color, I'll do 50 greens and 50 blues. So they're just beautiful. And these are, and let me open one up for you.
Of course,
this
please.
is my favorite color. It's more of a chartreusey green. It goes, I think it's a neutral. I think it looks great with everything. But you can see there's, you know, some peaks and valleys. There's a little bit mottled. It looks a little tie-dye in this area. I probably didn't mix the powders together real well, so yellow popped out a little bit more. So it's fun, and I love raw edges. You know, you can see in my work that raw edges, and I really don't bind anything. It's really contemporary.
Well, how inspiring to learn how you dyed fabric. And Mimi, thank you for sharing that with us. And you can find out more about Mimi's website by going to sewingwithnancy.com. Click under Nancy's Corner, and under the 2400 series, you'll find the information on Mimi's great work and her textile art. Well, thank you for joining us on this first program of Sensational Scarves. Donna Fensky will be back next time on our second program of this two-part series, where we'll have many more ideas for you. As always, thanks for joining us. Bye for now.
Nancy has written a fully illustrated book entitled Sensational Scarves, which includes all the information from this two-part series. It's $14.99 plus shipping and handling. To order the book, call 800-336-8373 or visit our website at sewingwithnancy.com/2403. Order item number BK2403, Sensational Scarves, credit card orders only. To pay by check or money order, call the number on the screen for details. Visit Nancy's website at sewingwithnancy.com for more information on this program. Sewing with Nancy, TV's longest-airing sewing and quilting program with Nancy Zieman, has been brought to you by Baby Lock, Madeira Threads, Koala Studios, Clover, Amazing Designs, and Classe Needles. Closed captioning funding provided by Rowenta. Sewing with Nancy is a co-production of Nancy Zieman Productions and Wisconsin Public Television.